What separates a good speaker from a great one? Sure, some of it's natural talent, but a lot more of it's technique. On today's show, we're digging into the skills and habits that transform capable presenters into unforgettable communicators, and we've got presentation royalty joining us to break it all down. You ready? Let's go! Today's guest, Patricia Fripp, is a Hall of Fame keynote speaker, award-winning speechwriter, and her latest book is Deliver Unforgettable Presentations. In her career, she's delivered over 3,500 live presentations and hundreds of virtual presentations, and the National Speakers Association elected her its first women president. I'm going to let her take it from here because she's got her journey and she'll do a better job at it than I will. So, Patricia Fripp, this is your life. Let's hear from you. Tell us a little bit about you.
A true American success story who's British.
There you go.
I arrived in America at 20, no job, nowhere to live, didn't know anyone, had $500, and I knew everyone in America was rich and the streets were paved with movie stars. So my first job was at the Mark Hopkins Hotel in the beauty salon. I then became one of the first women in men's hairstyling when it was a new industry, and I was one of the last students of the great Jay Sebring, who you may remember was murdered by the Manson family. And that is when I became the face of the salon and started speaking. I went into business for myself at 30. I had all the movers and shakers from the financial district as my clients, which was a great education on business. And then I started speaking to promote my business, then for a hair product company, went to the National Speakers Association and saw a vision of my future. Wow. Is that a good enough place to stop at this point?
Yeah, I would say vision of your future is pretty good. You know, we were talking before we started, between the two of us, I don't know if you want years out here, between the two of us, we've got over 8 decades, and Patricia has me beat, and you won't hear that very often in this show, but let's go back to that Speakers Association. Maybe that was it, but what do you think the biggest leap that elevated your career was?
Well, understand, I was a very successful and loved being a hairstylist. And when I went, I was 2 years into a 10-year lease. And, you know, there are those you never know moments. I walked in and there were 3 men at lunch. And remember, I'm 32 and cute. I went up and said, "May I join you?" One of the gentlemen was Ty Boyd, and afterwards people said, "Patricia, do you know who that is? He's really famous. He's got his own TV show in Charlotte. He's one of the most in speakers." Had I known he was famous, I would not have had the confidence to say, "May I join you?" One of the other men, Paul Sturgeon, who was a trainer in the insurance industry, said, "Patricia, I'm running a program this afternoon called Speak to Me for new speakers to get up and do 10 minutes. Would you like to be on the program?" I said yes, because the secret of life, as you very well know, is to recognize opportunity. It's the only time in my life my knees were shaking violently. And after my 10 minutes of best Rotary Club material, a gentleman called Mike Frank came up and said, "Patricia, you're the best woman speaker I've ever heard. Do you have a brochure?" I said, "No." He called me a month later and booked me to speak on the same program to 2,000 people with Robert Schuller, the minister from Garden Grove, who you'll remember was one of the big speakers in those days, and some other really famous speakers. So that's why I say only in America and the National Speakers Association. I did realize, however, to become a successful anything, and in this case a speaker, was going to be a long-term goal. I had 8 more years on my lease. I was loving my business, and my goal was to be in a position, if I chose to be able to go full-time. And at that point,
You took the leap.
I actually retired a year ahead of schedule,
Right.
because that's when I became president of the National Speakers Association.
Yeah, see, I came a more conventional route. I was a training specialist and a trainer, and I was working for Xerox, and we brought in a professional speaker. And that professional speaker, I remember, this was, back in the early 80s, was getting $1,500 for his 1 hour. And I went, holy moly, how do you get that much? And, but I looked and I kind of heard my dad's voice in my head. See that guy? Puts his pants on the same way you do, one leg at a time. And I was speaking also, and I felt, I can hold up against this guy. That was my leap of, I didn't leave the next day, but I began to think, what would it be like? And if I don't scratch this itch now, I may never scratch it. So let's go for it. But there are those moments in time for us. But we all have our leaps. Curious because you have quite the personality, as most professional speakers do. But do you think that great speakers, do you think it comes from nature or nurture? Are we born with it? Can we acquire it? Or am I guessing we're going to be a little bit on both sides?
You might remember Bud Friedman, who started the improv comedy clubs, where Jay Leno and really a lot of the stars really got launched. Lily Tomlin, for example. And I went to hear him speak many, many years ago. And I was the only one in the audience who didn't want to be a comedian. I was just, as a professional speaker, was always interested in adding comedy. And I asked him, is there such a thing as natural talent? He said, yes. However, there's no overnight success. Even Jay Leno, naturally talented, took 15 years. So yes, for some of us, it is more natural to get up. However, even though it might be more natural and you have a great personality, you can stand up and entertain your friends, you still have to understand the techniques. Because the disciplines in any one technique, or the disciplines in any one discipline, are the same as any other discipline. For example, I used to compare how I taught people to cut hair was very much how I teach them to structure a presentation. And I promise you, as I'm sure you have found in your experience, some people, you're not going to take a shy, modest, introverted person and in 2 weeks turn them into a superstar. However, if they happen to be an executive of a technology company and they have to be the face of the company, if they're willing to, we can turn them into superstars. I would make the claim that anyone can be better.
Right.
You understand structure, you understand specificity, you understand how to engage an audience, that it's about them, not you, how to tell a story that's tight and memorable.
Right. And have you ever heard of a speaker named Ben Feldman? I know you're in the sales training area. I was a New York Life agent when I first got out of the University of Maryland, so I was a life, health, and disability guy. And Ben Feldman kind of ruled the world. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh,
name?
I remember going to big rallies and seeing him speak.
Yeah. The amazing thing about Ben Feldman and what was an inspiration to me was he didn't really possess all the characteristics you'd associate with, a powerhouse speaker and arguably the greatest salesperson who ever lived. And I say that because I'm just going by numbers. Feldman was tripling number 2 in the industry for years with 250,000 people. That's just not statistically possible. It shouldn't be. But he didn't possess all those characteristics. That really helped me kind of cement the fact that I don't have to be somebody else. If Ben Feldman can do this, not particularly funny, not a big personality, but committing to his own style, that really helped me along the way.
I was booked to speak. The last time I spoke at a big event at Microsoft. This was what used to be secretary's days, so it was administrative assistant day. However, people in Microsoft around the world could apply to their bosses. We had people as far away from Japan. It was a big meeting, and the opening speaker was the chief compliance officer. And I thought, somebody made a mistake. I know this is valuable information, but to kick off a conference, he was amazing. I was so wrong. My thought of how could anyone whose life is compliance can be a dynamic and entertaining and educational speaker. He was fabulous.
Yeah, and they're fabulous because somebody got in their ear and said, don't look at the movies right now. You're not priming the pump. Zig does his own thing. But that's a tough one because I love the fact we're on this topic. So many well-meaning people who are trying to help tend to kind of mesh together their style and the technique, and frequently they're giving more style points. You got to put in humor. Well, no, you don't. There's 40 other ways to be interesting, okay?
I know people have said to you, as they've said to me,
right.
I want to be funnier. Right. And I always ask, when you're in a social situation, do you make your friends laugh? No. Well, if you can't make your friends laugh, you're not going to make an audience laugh. So why don't you just look to be brilliant and dynamic and pithy and thoughtful?
Right.
And I tell my clients, because when people get to know me, they might think I'm a little, in England, they would say over the top. I always try and moderate. When I first meet people, I'm not going to be 100% Fripp.
Right.
I'll be a little calmer. But I always tell people, especially if they've seen me on stage, I am not trying to make you me. A good coach makes you the best you, which is exactly what you're saying. Not to emulate anyone else, just bring what is inside you that you might not recognize and make it larger. And for me, although I work on delivery, to me, it's always first thing is, all right, if you had one sentence rather than 10 minutes or 45 minutes, what would you say? How can you summarize your big idea, the premise, the central theme in one idea? Because if you give me a paragraph, either you don't understand your subject or you're describing what's going in your presentation. I want to know the premise. And then we build your talking points around proving your premise.
Right. Well said. I changed that question a little bit because I've gotten that deer in the headlights look. And so sometimes I'll rephrase it of, if the audience walks out with one idea, one thought, what would it be? That they usually can answer. Oh, I definitely want. All right, now let's back up to premise a little bit here. But sometimes we have to go in through the side door.
Good. And I know when people have said to me in the past, you go back a few decades, and when I would ask clients, well, how would you consider this presentation a success? And sometimes they say, one really good idea that people could use. And I say, well, if you only get one idea, I didn't do my job.
Right. So what are you looking for,
45
Patricia?
Minutes.
So what do you want? What is your idea? What do you want them to walk out with? I'll tell you what I want them to walk out with. Oh, and I'll go first. I want them to walk out with first of all, in a keynote in 1 hour in front of 500 people. I almost get nauseous when people say, if I can get one or two good ideas, I want more than that, but I want something they can implement, something that's measurable, repeatable, predictable, some change. If you give me a workshop, okay, now I'm insulted by the question almost, because now I really want to change the culture of the organization. That's why you brought me here. But that 1 hour keynote is tricky, Patricia, because I'm not going to change the whole organization in an hour. I can't restructure all your sales training, but by golly, by gosh, I can give you a handful of ideas that will be implemented, supported by a job aid that you can coach and train to. Something of value.
Well, of course, a keynote is usually a high-level version of what we can do. You give me an afternoon, you give me all day, you give me 3 weeks, you can go into depth.
Right.
And of course, a keynote has to, when people say to me, oh, I want to be a motivational speaker, I say, look, motivational, the chief of compliance was motivational. You get people excited to follow up and do more than what they heard. Right. So I think every presentation, even if it's just a demo on how to use our technology, should be motivational. You should excite the audience. And when clients say, I'm very excited to be here, I said, yes, because they're paying you. You want the audience excited you're there. Maybe you don't. And here's one of I was coaching, really a heavy-duty female executive in New York. Incredible. And she and her partner, these were the hot agencies, and they had a really great book they were promoting. So I worked with them both so they could deliver this speech together or separately. And I watched a video. She said, oh, this was in Vegas, and people loved it. And her opening was, really, great to be here, and it's exciting. We're in Vegas, and I brought my husband. We're going to turn it into a vacation. And I said, you don't start that way. Because one, you are there to serve them. The fact that you're thinking, oh, you're taking advantage. Oh, I wonder if we're paying his airline ticket as well. Certainly have a vacation and bring your husband, but I wouldn't tell your audience.
Right.
Not as your opening. And I always say the purpose of your opening is to arouse interest in the subject.
Yeah. And what's in it for me to hear this subject? The classic whiffum, right? My dad used to introduce me to his friends. He'd go, here's my boy. He's a motivational speaker. And for a few years, I would go cross, and I go, Dad, and I try to explain to him, if I couldn't motivate, inspire, and entertain, I wouldn't be in the business. But I'm an ex-Xerox guy. I am there to teach and inform. And then after a while, I went, all right, already, I'll let it go. But you and me both, I of course, it'll be motivational and inspirational and all these wonderful things you want. But boy, when we can wrap that around a real topic and have people walk out doing things a little bit differently and never forgetting where they learned it from. Every answer really should be, well, what's in the best interest of the audience? That's why your story with the telling about my trip, I don't know how that helps my audience. Certainly not out of the gate. Let's jump to what makes speakers great. And I'm not going to put a clock up for you because we could spend a week talking about this. Cherry pick a couple ones that the good. And I think that's the audience right now that's listening. They're good. They want to be great. Okay. What's a couple of tips you could suggest?
Well, if there were one technique, and I use this with all my clients, but like you, I have some Hall of Fame speakers who are ready. They've got their talk. They're getting $25,000. They're in demand, and they want to get better, which is very commendable. And I say, fine, I will watch your video and I don't want an edited demo. I want the live raw footage. So I will certainly watch it, and we can go through it a sentence at a time and analyze if that works, why. And I'll often say, can you see you walked on that phrase, and it would have been much better if you had stood still and let it resonate and then move. So we look at that closely. But for me, I want a transcript. And I'm going to say, get colored pens, and you look at the transcript, because as you know, when you teach your clients, there's the speech you prepare, there's the one you deliver, and then if you evaluate it, your next speech will be better. And you look at a transcript. First, you get a yellow highlighter and you highlight all the I. eyes, especially if you look at your script and nearly every paragraph begins with I, and re-script it so you could make it more about the audience. So I always say, watch your I versus you ratio. You're not going to say, I'm going to talk about, no, it's in the next 45 minutes, you will learn, hear, or better understand. Always make it about them. If you're telling a story that's obviously, it's from your experience, but find ways to bring them in. I wish you could have been there. How would you felt in this situation? If you were working with this client, what advice would you have given? So you find, how can you bring them into your stories? So it's, look at the eyes. Then I would look at sentences that are too long. If your sentence is 3 lines on the page, the chances are you're not using enough what I would call verbal punctuation. If this speech was written, you know, if you look at it, if it were written, where would the commas be, the periods, the new paragraphs? And build the pauses in. Build the dramatic pauses. So the written word is for the I, the spoken word is for the rhythm. And I encourage my clients, when you're looking at your opening, do short phrases down the page so that as you're rehearsing, you're getting in the rhythm.
Right.
Okay? So we look at the length of the sentences. We look at, are you speaking on this one point for 4 paragraphs and the next one 3 sentences? Maybe you don't need that point, or you're restructuring it. And then I always look at the quality of words. Specificity builds credibility. And I am very nitpicky, and I make people slap their hands. And if I'm in a Zoom meeting, which I often am, I'm slapping my hand as well to get you in the habit not to say this word. So first of all, my number 1 word is, if it weren't a thing, what would it be? And I was with one of my friends, Darren LaCroix, one of my co-authors of Unforgettable Presentations. He was the 2001 world champion of public speaking in Toastmasters. And we used to do coaching camps together. And people kept getting up. The number 1 thing to do this, the 3 things to do that. And at the back of the room, I came up with 38 words they could have used instead of thing. And one of my examples, working with engineers who are, of course, getting ready for the user meetings, and they're content experts. And this brilliant engineer said, there are 2 things people love about. And I said, well, if they weren't things, what would they be? He said, innovative upgrades. I said, there are billions of people in the world. What people love your innovative upgrades? He said, systems administrators. I said, who's in your audience? 80% systems administrators. So people often ask me, how do you help these technical presenters? You can't explain what they do, by looking at how they explain it. Because I said, not only am I trying to get you better, your audience might be smarter on this topic or more familiar than me. But if you're confusing me, you're definitely going to confuse them. So I look at the quality of words. If it weren't a thing, what would it be? And for example, I was coaching a lawyer, and her speech was on modern day slavery. And I said, you have to talk about modern day slavery from the point of a man, a woman, and a couple, or a family that is brought over and put in what is modern day slavery. And in one of her stories, she said, he promised her many things. I said, no, he didn't. He promised her a life of romance and adventure. And those 2 words give you so much more information than the time it says to say them, and in the context of the story you understand why this young woman would leave the safety of her home and go off with this man. So I look at the quality of the words. If it's not, if you can't weigh it, it's not a ton. Oh, got tons of ideas. No, you didn't. You got 3 pages of notes and 6 actionable items. Be specific. Bunches. No, if it's not fruits and vegetables, it's not bunches. Give me another way to describe. Is it half a dozen? Is it a dozen? Is it a handful? Is it 100? Oh, that's what I look at.
Wow. You know, a few things jumped out at me, and I was taking some notes.
A few things?
Oh, no. two items in particular really caught my eye. One was your use of the word pause. I think that particularly salespeople who we both train, I wish they would pause more.
Yes.
But I wish speakers would pause more. And I know that it's a little scary up there because you want to make the use of every second you can. But those are important seconds to pause on. And the second... Yeah.
Oh, no, shut up. I will zip it till you finish the second, but I do want to go back and mention
I'm stuck on the second one, Patricia, because it deals with the word things. I really like how specific that is, and the moment you said that, my mind began to race into how many times I've made that mistake. And I really appreciate that. All right, I'm done. You go.
Well, with pausing,
yeah,
I say, 1, for you it's good, because you get to breathe, gives you a moment to think what comes next. However, for the audience, it's even when we are speaking and they are not talking to us, it is still a duologue. You and I are going back and forth. We might interrupt each other as I just did, but it's a conversation. Mm-hmm. And I say a good speech is not a conversation, however it sounds conversational, except it's tighter and more specific because you thought about it before you said it when you're preparing your speech. However, so if you want to say, the pause gives the audience time to think. For example, let's say, it might interest you to know. Oh, what interests me? Anytime they hear you, they're going to reconnect. And you give them time to think, oh, what? Oh, no. Might interest you to know what? And then when you say, and I recommend when people do a review of their presentations, they say, when you talk about this presentation, and please do, when you go back to your team, remember to tell them, give them time to pick up a pen. And then you do your review and you reinforce the idea that this presentation has to be shared. And not only do you put it in their mind, you have to talk about this. This information is not just for you, it's for your team, it's for your leadership. Whoever you want them to repeat it to, and you're telling them in your review what words you want to say to your team. I had a great speech coach, Ron Arden, and he came from the world of the theatre. He'd been an actor, but really he was a director. And he had 8 different types of pauses for different length. Is it a dramatic pause? Is it a sense pause? I mean, and I added a few more, like you pause because the technology broke.
You need a sip of water. Yeah.
Yeah. And he also gave a piece of advice that I pass on to my clients and audiences. And he said, Patricia, think of an orchestra. It's loud and it's soft. And it's because you have the variety that makes it interesting. And he always said, look, you're energetic. come out at 80% Fripp, so that you have room to go up to 100% Fripp. And as I have watched my clients and other speakers, I remember one time I was delivering a keynote, and I was also at the end of the conference doing a review of the highlights of the meeting at the end. And I was walking into all the breakouts. There were 4 in a row, so I'd go in and see and then come back. And this was a conference, and the first woman, she was very glamorous, her hair, my kind of woman. And she was a professional speaker just in that industry. She'd come from the industry, and that was now what she did. All the other speakers were from the industry, but still practicing. So obviously they might not have been quite as put together as her presentation was. And I thought, oh, good, I like her. And she came back, and I kept surfing, and I came back. And after the third time I walked in, I thought, she's dynamic, she's together, she knows what she's talking about. There's something wrong. And then I realized her energy was wonderful. However, it never changed. It was 100% her all the time. And by the third time I was in there, I realized this is getting boring, even though the content is good, because she wasn't orchestrating it.
Yeah, makes sense. I learned early on as a trainer, somebody put it up on the board and I wrote it down, never forgot it. Emphasize everything, emphasize nothing.
Exactly.
And picking your spot there. 2 more questions, I'll let you go. But one is, and I can't help but sort of put my slant on it, even asking it, timing. How important is timing as a speaker? And I think we're dancing all around it, but let's just put it on the table and say it.
Well, it is very important, as we learn from the world of comedy.
Right.
There is the timing with how long you spend on each idea. There's the timing in it, how you deliver it, and wait for the pause. And it's how long do you speak without audience interaction. Now, I remember early in my career, I delivered a keynote at sales and marketing executives. This was an after-dinner program, and these were very big clubs at the time. And a couple of trainers were there, and we had a conversation after, and they said, you didn't do any audience participation. I said, this is an after-dinner speech. People have been working all day and they're drinking. This is not a time to be breaking into groups and discussing the point. Did you notice how many questions I asked and paused to let them think? Did you notice how many times I made them laugh or at least interact? Did you notice how many questions I asked? And so there are questions, there's laughter, there's time to think. So there are different ways of audience interaction. Yeah. If you're in an afternoon workshop and you're there to re-strategize how you're organizing your company, after dinner would not have been appropriate.
No. I have to tell you, I'm feeling a little guilty about the question, because honestly, you and I could do an hour on just timing. And I sort of pigeonholed it when I was asking it, thinking about when we tell a story, because when we're talking about pausing, we're talking about maybe picking up that pace and then slowing it down to really make a point. We're talking about moving the pitch. So, and I will tell you that one time I was at a retreat. Barrett Kohler is one of my publishers, and we have a retreat every year. And we were sort of talking about each other, and somebody said to me, and I got emotional, because they said, we're talking about, Larry does really well at this, and Mary does that. And one person stood up and said, and Rob is a timing man. His timing is great. And I got emotional because no one ever said that to me, but I thought, you could not say a nicer thing to me than then you valued the way I was using my timing. So that's how important it is to me. And I never, ever forgot it. It's the kindest thing anyone ever said to me as a speaker. I'm almost getting emotional now, even telling the story. It only happened 8 years ago. All right, last question for you, my royalty guest. Somebody listening right now going to walk away and they say, oh, this was like a banquet. What would be one thing maybe we'd want them to go ahead and say, lots of great ideas and slow down and take them all. But boy, if you walk out of this room or this show with one idea, don't forget this one. Mine is timing. Okay, I grabbed that one. You can't use it. What's yours?
And I would say specific language.
Yeah.
Record your side of conversations. When you have Zoom meetings, listen to what you said. Turn on the transcript in your Zoom meetings and read what came out of your mouth. We can be shocked.
Yeah. And thank you for that, because I turn off the transcripts and now I'm going to turn them back on. I never thought of that before. So I'm glad the audience got a good tidbit there. You gave me one too. You have been amazing. I am so grateful to not only have had you on the show, but to meet you as a friend. I value what you say. I value the time you gave me, and I'm grateful. Tell me the name of that book again, because I want everybody getting it, and I want reviews on that book. There's 60 of them right now, if not more. Let's put another 20 on today. What's the name of that book again?
Deliver Unforgettable Presentations. And if any of your fans want to go to Fripp, Fripp, my name is underneath, fripp.com, up at the right, free resources. There are special reports on sales and presentations and moderating panels. No, free resources.
There you go. And Patricia would also love if you drop by her LinkedIn site as well. So go look her up.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Yes, connect on LinkedIn and just notice where we met.
Right.
You're a fan of the Presentation Whisperer.
There you go.
Like that. I like that title.
Put that in there. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been an absolute joy, and I'm grateful. Thank you, Patricia.
My pleasure.
Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, although that's going to be hard to do. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please follow, rate, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. For more resources and to connect with Rob, visit thepresentationwhisperer.com.